What I'll explain in this video is another concept. Well, I need to explain things in concepts so your mind can grasp them and store them. Okay, that's how the human mind works. Cultural reset. A cultural reset is when the rulers of a territory sense that the economy is collapsing and that the structure as they are used to, as the population used to, cannot last for long. So what happens is that the rulers begin to pull back from governing the territory. Formally, externally, they still appear as if they're governing the territory, but in fact they pull back and they allow things to collapse. And when things collapse, the people will go off at each other. Because that often happens amongst mankind when things go wrong, go off at each other. They don't question why didn't the leaders do anything. So when people go off at each other, then those same rulers put on another disguise and they come in and they establish a so-called new order, but it's really a reset of what was there before. Okay, for example, you had the Greek Empire, which became the Roman Empire. Rome was a republic and part of the Greek Empire. But the Greek Empire was divided in four after the physical death of Alexander of Macedonia, or Apollo. When Apollo's body passed away, the empire was divided in four. Rome, as part of the Greek Empire, grew. But the structure of having four capitals to run the Greek Empire, that didn't work anymore. So they had to, they had to reset the Greek Empire. And they figured out the Greek Empire is now expanding more into the Western Hemisphere, economically speaking. So in the West now, in the west of Europe, the Greek Empire expanded a lot. And you also had Greeks being economically active in the Americas. So the Greek Empire expanded. So it became more logical and practical to have one center of power for the Greek Empire. But even though most of the world's population lived between the east of Italy and the Japanese island of Kyushu, that's where most of human population lived, you also had several million people living on the Western Hemisphere. So the new capital of the Greek Empire also had to be on a location that the people on the Western Hemisphere could be reached. While I'm saying this, they had to travel from Olisipo. Olisipo was the ancient name of Lisbon. From Olisipo, they would cross the Atlantic to the Caribbean, and from there they would visit the local nations that were there. Okay, so the new capital of the Greek Empire had to be both accessible for both merchants from the Western Hemisphere coming to Europe, to the Mediterranean I mean, but also from the Mediterranean the Greeks had to be able to sail safely from the center of their empire to the Western Hemisphere. But still, the majority of mankind lived between the east of Italy and the Japanese island of Kyushu, so they still had to be in touch with that place also. So the obvious location for the center of the Greek Empire would be Rome. And Rome was growing and growing. Rome was not that important yet at that time, but it was growing and growing. So when the big rulers of the world decided, you know what, Rome has to be the center now, it's also in the center of the Mediterranean. So from Rome, it takes 13 days to sail to Egypt, or 2 weeks to go to the east of the Mediterranean. And from Egypt, you have sail ships that go to India and also to China. And from the east of the Mediterranean, you also had trade routes that go all the way to what they call Korea. So from Rome, it was practical to reach the east. And from Rome, it was also practical to sail to the west and from there cross to the Western Hemisphere. So the big rulers of the world made Rome the center of the world, and Rome became the capital of the Greek Empire. But the old structure of the Greek Empire was collapsing economically, so that they allowed it to collapse. And while it collapsed, the pagan rulers conducted those arranged fights between militias, which we call war, but it's really a hoax because it's arranged, it's staged. Now there are real troops dying here and there, but it's arranged. The outcome was already determined, and that's how the Roman Empire was established. That was the principle that was established then. And some of the Greek mini countries had to disappear in order that the Roman Empire could replace the structure that fell apart. But the Roman Empire was really the Greek Empire renewed. But now, Rome was the capital. It was a cultural reset. You still had the same Greek culture, but it was now in a Roman fashion. You get what I'm saying? So it's a cultural reset. Therefore, also an economic reset. Let me give another. Let me give another example. You have one Chinese dynasty, so one trans-elite family that realized that, hold on a minute, the economy of the Chinese Empire between those kingdoms, there's a big recession now, and we can't fix this because this is going down. In order to change this, we need to reset the whole economy. But the people are not going to accept this. And if we just enforce a new policy, there's going to be mass protests and resistance, and we don't have the military to deal with those people. So the trans elites, they began to commit arson themselves, cause a lot of fires here and there. When people become hysterical, and the economy collapses because of the hysteria of the people, now another trans elite family comes, so-called fix everything, and now they restructure the economy. It's a reset that takes place. So the rulers pull back while the population thinks they're active ruling them, and they just see everything burn down. So that later they restructure everything. That's the myth of the phoenix. It's a bird that dies into flames, and from the ashes a whole new bird arises. Or, as George W. Bush said, order out of chaos. Well, which is also a theme common amongst the big rulers, order up cow. That's how they do it. So, now that you understand this, I want to explain the following to you. And this may help some of you who have questions concerning your historical identity. In the end of the 18th century, Spain was the #1 maritime empire. The Spanish dollar was the international currency. Britain expanded in South Asia. The Dutch were dominant in Southeast Asia, or Nusantara as the Malay people called it. Still, Spain was #1. Then you had the British. Then came the Dutch. The Portuguese were seen as an extension of Spain because Portugal fell under the shadows of Spain, politically and economically speaking. The Chinese Empire and the Japanese Empire didn't have maritime power. They were only located where they were. But then came the French Revolution, in which many French people, because the Bourbon dynasty that ruled both Spain and France, well, the Bourbon dynasty, which is a trans-elite family, they made a mess of France. They made people's lives sour over there. While in Spain, they made sure things were functioning well, because that's how those trans-elites operate. They operate in duality. They think they are the gods, and we human beings are the cattle. Okay, so they, as our gods, as they see it, have to manage both good and evil. So they do evil and they do good. because they think it's their obligation to rule both good and evil. They want to replace the Holy Spirit, who eventually works out everything for the good of those that trust Christ. Now they, being the Antichrist system, worshiping Apollo, want to be the ones covering both good and evil. So they do evil here and good there, to prove to themselves and to us that they are the gods, they know what they're doing. So in the Kingdom of France, they made a mess. While in the Spanish kingdoms, because Spain was not a country, in the Spanish kingdoms they made sure things were functioning. Now, when the people in France, because one of the three, what you're going to call Europeans, was French. So the French were a very important ethnicity. Well, okay, I don't want to say nation, that's why I use the word ethnicity, but when you look at it, the French, Germans, all of those peoples are really one ethnicity. You could call them Caucasian. Okay, but Caucasian also a political term, that's, but okay, you get what I'm saying. The French, from the white people, one of the three white people was French. So French was also the common language in diplomacies in Europe. When they had to make contracts or business deals, they did it in French. Now, worldwide, they counted their finances in the Spanish dollar, but when it comes to diplomacy and contracts between, I would say, businesses that travel, that trade overseas, they did it in French. And many people wanted to speak French too, because French was like a status language. During the French Revolution, when France collapsed, it was a very big thing. It was like an earthquake that happened. The stability of Europe collapsed. And here's the thing, many French people began to kill one another. It was like a zombie apocalypse. Okay, it's evening now, so I need to speak a bit more slower so I won't make any articulation mistakes. Look, so France collapsed. The king was decapitated and all of that. And for a few years, this rage spread throughout Europe. So it became so bad that the king rules, guys, hold on a minute, we need to stop this. And they managed to stop it, but the damage was already done. So at the end of the 1790s, near the end of it, it became obvious that the way the world's economy functioned had to change. Because in Europe you had France, you had the Spanish kingdoms, you have Portugal, you had the Great Britain over there with Ireland, you had Denmark that also possessed Norway, you had Sweden that possessed also Finland, and then you had many of the small German states here and there. The Kingdom of Prussia became the most dominant, but yet many of those shattered states here and there. Also, Italy was shared in many small countries here and there. And you had the Russian Empire, of course, which wasn't that strong at the time. So things had to be reconstructed, because how the economy worked back then, it had to change. And what you see then is that this guy, Napoleon, I'm not sure if he was a natural man, because the trans elites often use, well, they are trans elites that often use trainees as their agents. Napoleon, the name Napoleon means in Apollo. Who calls his son in Apollo? That name did not exist, so that already shows you that it's an actor. Okay, this actor Napoleon appears on the world scene, takes over Italy and France, and a whole reconstruction happens in Europe. Now you have borders being drawn again. You had the Netherlands became a kingdom. Luigi, the younger brother of Napoleon, became king of the Netherlands. You had a lot of reconstruction going on. Napoleon occupied Spain, which led to dissatisfaction in the Spanish Americas, yes, revolutions in the Americas, yet Spanish America being dissolved as an empire. And you need to think about this. Spanish America was a stable unit. When that fell apart, trade from Asia to the Americas stopped. Trade from China, from Asia towards Europe through Spanish America stopped. So that was another economic disaster. And what happened was, what you see in the early 19th century, is that while Spanish America, which was actually the wealthiest region in the world, when that fell apart, you had the British that expanded more into Asia. But it was very slow. The Germans were the ones that arose. The Germans were already dominant in Europe, yet the French being in a majority in numbers, but the Germans were always the economic power of what's called the white people. So the Germans expanded. And then you see from 1830 that the Muslim Caliphate, or was left with, is dealt with. And then France and Britain expand into Africa. So when you look at it carefully, the early 19th century was really a reset in how the world's economy operated. Because the Chinese Empire was dependent on Spain, I would say Spanish America, for its export. Because much of the export went to Spanish America. From Spanish America went to Europe. Because the wind from the Philippines all the way to Mexico was a good one, a safe one. Or else had to sail all the way around Africa, and at Cape the Good Hope there are many storms, not very safe to sail over there. So when Spanish America collapsed, it was a loss for everyone. But the bank rules of the world made Spanish America collapse because they wanted to shift the focus to London, and from London to what later became the United States. And what you see is that during the mid 19th century, what we call now the United States expanded, and now that this relatively new country, the United States, now had borders from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And once they got borders to the Pacific, they also forced trade with China and Japan. So what happened now was that what you had before during the Spanish Empire, that was trade from Asia going to the Americas, to Europe, that was reinstalled, but now it went through that collection of states called the United States, instead of going through Mexico and Central America. So it's really a reset that took place. And because now the focus was not that much on, on Spain and France, because France was important for diplomatic relations. Because of that now, because of that, the United States then could be used far more effectively for international trade, because it was not a kingdom, it was not an empire. So it had no official overlord. So anyone could just come here, and with here I mean anyone could just imagine in the States that everyone could come there and do what they wanted to do. And Spanish America, those republics, those former kingdoms and kingdom republics were stagnating. So they weren't that economically relevant anymore, because it now went through the United States. And that's how, entering the 20th century, the United States grew as a regional power. Till after the Second World War, it became a superpower. It was a shift that took place. So there was a cultural reset that took place. Now Spanish remained very important. Just look at today, it's still important to this day. But English now became the spoken language. So the end of the 18th century, it was obvious that the reset had to take place because were about to fall apart. Spanish America was not to fall apart, but Spanish America was part of the world system, and the world system a change had to occur. So it shifted from Spanish to British. Okay, and from British it extended to American. But it remained British, and that's how English became the spoken language. That's why now I use English to speak to you directly. If things would not have, if the reset would not have taken place in the early 19th century, I would speak in Spanish now to you, to reach you. But I use English now because shift went from Spanish to British. And the British Empire also fell apart because there was another reset. Because the British Empire, the whole construct was not made to last. Okay, the British Empire would have imploded in itself if it would have continued. So then, from the British Empire, the focus became on America, and slowly it's now shifting from America to the EU, but we now have the Union in Europe, and also to Asia. So what you see now is that resets have taken place here and there. I've taken my time to explain all of this in this video. Cultural resets are when the rulers pull back, allow what has been established to collapse, so they can restructure it under either another flag or under a new name, but it's really the old they reaffirm. And the people are often not aware that it's the same thing being reinstalled. So, in the 18th century, it was Spanish America number one, because trade between East and West happened through the Americas. Spanish Empire fell apart. You still had Spanish America, but those became republics, were dysfunctional. And the United States expanded to the Pacific, and now through the United States, trade between East and West continued. So a cultural reset, and that's why English became important now. Before Spanish was important, now English became important, and Spanish became less important, and French became important for Africa and Europe. But overall, in the maritime world, it was English now that was important. Well, I hope you get this this not concept. I hope you understand cultural resets now, because that is what's happening now also. With what they call the migration crisis and the rise of alt-right movements in Europe, and all of that is a cultural reset. The economic crisis that began in 2008, all of that was all part of the reset. So the world is not going to end with all of that. They're just shifting things. But they need people to be afraid, so that people will notice the shift that is happening. Because many people don't want to give up how things are, to embrace how things are becoming, because often how things are becoming, it will not be in their advantage. So that's why they put all this fear out there to their false prophets, so that people are hysterical, so that when the shift happens, people don't even notice it's happening. That's how the big rules of the rules do it. And this is really the shift that's happening. In the colonial era, in the 18th and 19th century, white supremacy or racism has been used to capture the minds of the masses worldwide. And now that same white supremacy has to change. It can remain white supremacy, but it can't operate in the same way anymore. So now the perceived glory of what they consider white people needs to disappear. And because whites are a minority and their numbers are decreasing, which is also caused by wrong policies that they've conducted amongst each other, now there needs to be a change here. But this white supremacist economic structure, People are used to it. Have been accustomed to it. Even those that are oppressed by it are used to it. So, for the world's economy to shift more towards Asia, a lot of people wouldn't take it. But that's why the collapse now of what we can consider white heritage is allowed to happen. No policy is taken to preserve it. And now we have all the right movements. Now we have those right-wing extremist movements rising up to fight for their heritage. And this will cause more dissatisfaction. And people are going off at each other. And this allowed so that when things get out of hand, slowly but surely, the new regime enters in. I hope this makes sense onto you. Well, I hope I've clarified to you what's going on now, so don't live in fear. I just gave you the bigger picture. Conspiracy theories, they point out facts to you, and you get lured by the facts before you know it, you're confused, and you're trapped in conspiracy theories. No, I give you the bigger picture so you know what's happening, and also use historical examples to show it onto you. 18th century, and even before, 16th to 18th century, Spain. Then, from Spain, slowly it became Britain, which was very short-lived, by the way. And from Britain, it slowly became the United States that exploited the fall of the former British Empire. Because without the fall of the British Empire and America, the United States couldn't have risen as a superpower. But now, its time as superpower is fading. So now the shift is happening towards Asia. That's why you have this promotion of Asian subculture so much in the West, because that's where the economic and cultural power shift is going towards. I don't know how exactly it will work out, don't ask me, but that's what's happening now. Well, for now, agree with Christ, be at peace.